Oh, well, hello everybody, and welcome to our very first inaugural New Day Films Meet the Filmmakers Showcase Series. As you saw in the chat room, feel free to add your name and gender pronoun and where you're calling from today. Say hello to us in the chat. And I want to let you guys know today we're going to be featuring 5 of our newest film releases. And you're going to be meeting some of the filmmakers who are behind the scenes, who actually made these films. And I just want to say one quick thing before we get started, how thrilled we as independent filmmakers are to have you guys as librarians and educators with us today, because I mean, this is what we're all about, sharing important content with you so that you can share it with the next generation. So without further ado, I'm going to get started in reading a few more things here. First, a little bit about New Day Films. We're celebrating our 50th anniversary next year, and we have operated as a collective that's run and owned by more than 100 filmmakers actually since 1971. So we all play a role in the New Day operations. And my job today is to be your moderator. So my name is Laura Seltzer-Duny, and my film in the co-op is Nobody Wants Us. It's a film about America's response to refugees during World War II. And I'd like to give a shout out to 2 of the co-organizers of this series. Our current New Day chair, Suzanne Barraza, if you want to give a wave, and Reagan Brashear, who came up with, and Reagan came up with this original idea for the series. So thank you for this. Thank you for this. Suzanne's films at New Day are Bagot, Uranium Drive-In, and her newest title is Massacre River, which will be featured in our 3rd showcase, which is on November 17th, so you can mark your calendars. We'll be sending you a link about that later. We'll be sending you lots of links for easy access. Reagan's film is Fixed, the science fiction of human enhancement. I'd also like to thank 2 other members from the collection sales team that are here today. Annie Small, if you want to give a wave. She will be our timekeeper today. And Mike Mascoll, who will be sharing a little bit about our special collections licensing and other offerings at the end of the session. Annie's film in the co-op she has 2 films, maybe 3 films, 2 films, Vultures of Tibet and Before You Know It. And Mike's films are On the Line, Where Sacrifice Begins, and Code Switching, Race and Identity in the Suburban Schoolhouse. And this last film will be in the showcase on November 4th, so you can mark your calendars for that one. Sadly, Karen Knox, she can't be with us today. Her father passed away, but she's the manager in our central office, and she's wonderful and has a wealth of knowledge about New Day operations and our films. So if you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to her, and you can find her information on our website as well. So without further ado, let's get started. You're going to be seeing 5 excerpts from 5 filmmakers, and then you can be thinking about questions that you might have for them, because we'll have a Q&A with each of the filmmakers afterwards. And a few quick housekeeping notes. We're recording this on Zoom, so we will share this link with you afterwards. And all the films via streaming are closed captions. So that's a nice feature you have, as well as one just also note is just to please note that because we're going to be sharing these trailers via Zoom, there might be a slight bit degradation, as a result. So we're also going to be sharing the links to each of our Filmmakers page on the New Day Film site, which includes a full resolution trailer. And we encourage you to put the questions in the chat. So you can put your questions in the chat with an asterisk, so we are aware that it's a specific question for the filmmaker, or you are more than welcome, and we really encourage just to feel free to unmute yourself and just feel free to ask one of us a direct question. So the first film is Waking Dream. We're going to see an excerpt from Waking Dream, directed by Theo Rigby. Theo is a director, cinematographer, and interactive storyteller based in San Francisco. And he's been creating stories focusing on the immigrant experience in the US for the last decade, and is the founder of iNation Media. So for the next 10 minutes, the floor is yours, Theo.
Thank you so much, Laura. And yeah, thank you for everybody helping to put this showcase together. It's a true kind of representation of New Day, just kind of an idea that gets sparked, I believe, by Reagan, and then a bunch of people that come together to make it happen. So that's kind of like true New Day in the virtual flesh right now. So thank you, everyone, and yeah. So Waking Dream is a series about 6 young people who happen to be undocumented and who happen to have DACA permits. And I've been working with immigrant and undocumented folks for a long time, actually about like 15-ish years. And working with the community, working with young undocumented people way before DACA, which came into being as an executive order under President Obama in 2012. And over the years, I really kind of often see stories about young undocumented people as really kind of a bit of pigeonholed into often kind of superstars, like the valedictorian coming out as undocumented at their high school graduation, or undocumented young person who's like the first medical student or the first lawyer, or incredibly kind of like overachieving folks. Or the total opposite, or you see kind of like stories about people who get in trouble with the law, and see a lot of anti-immigrant and kind of xenophobic language coming out about undocumented people and young undocumented people. And I thought that you really don't see the complexity and the nuance of the hundreds of thousands or really millions of young undocumented people living in this country. And I wanted to create a series that had a cast of that was really diverse. So Waking Dream, has six kind of cast members, and I wanted to show that undocumented community, one, isn't all native Spanish speaking. Not every undocumented person speaks Spanish, or even more like kind of stereotypically is from Mexico. But 40% of undocumented community in this country is not from a native Spanish speaking country. And I also wanted to show the diversity of what it's like living in different parts of the country as a young undocumented person. If you live in, say, a place like Arivaca, where Eva lives, that you'll hear from later, that's very close to the US-Mexico border in Arizona. It's a very different reality than if you live in, say, San Francisco, where I am right now, that's a sanctuary city. And then also wanted to show the different kind of variety of views that undocumented folks in the immigrant community are not a monolith and have a different variety of political views. Some are more liberal, some are more conservative. 2 of the participants in the film, as you'll see, grew up wanting to be soldiers, wanting to be Marines specifically, their entire life. They just wanted to be a Marine, and the film kind of follows them through process of trying to get to basic training to join the Army, actually, because you could only join the Army as an undocumented person. when I made the film, and that's actually not even possible anymore. So yeah, I want to stop there. I know I don't have too much time. We're going to watch the trailer, but really just I feel like I wanted the film to really just kind of dig into the complexity and layers of being an immigrant, being undocumented through these young people, and we go in through these young people, and then we get to meet their families, we get to meet their communities, and we kind of see the ripple effect that even though this film is about young people with DACA, that DACA is actually really limiting kind of lens. And we need to be looking holistically at immigrant and undocumented folks, regardless of whatever status they might have at this specific time, and thinking about where immigrant community is in relation to us, and how kind of interconnected we all are. So with that, let's watch the trailer and then come back with some questions.
Hola, ¿cómo está? What's up?
I'm here today to announce that the program known as DACA is being rescinded.
As most of you know, I'm undocumented. DACA gives me a work permit to be able to be in school and be your teacher. When that goes away, I technically can't be in front of you.
Identical twins John and James want nothing more than to serve in the military.
I solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution. This is a way for us to give back. I'm here willing to lay down my life for the people of the United States.
Soy oscura, nací del agua y de la carne, pero mi canto hoy crece y el próximo parto será de fuego.
We need to learn to just be proud of who you are regardless, to own the things that you have done for this country.
I know what it's like to have your family being torn apart.
My protection from deportation is ending. ICE could pick me up at any time.
My fear right now is I'll have to go back in hiding, and now it's not just me. I have 2 kids. I love this country. Like, I consider myself American, even though America doesn't consider me that.
My dad was deported. The last time I saw my dad was when I was about 10 years old.
¿Cómo está?
Somos igualitos. Hay mucha tristeza cuando uno está lejos de la familia. Sabe que yo no estuve con él ese tiempo que él más me necesitaba.
I had to fight tooth and nails for the last 2 years just to get a ship date.
A lot of people have told us to embrace the suck, but when does it stop? Does it stop when we're detained?
The majority of the American people all support the passage of a Clean Dream Act.
What is the American dream? That's a question that I've asked myself so many times. I'm just gonna give it my all and make sure that I leave my mark.
Thank you so much, Theo. I'm going to have some, start off with some questions, and I'd love for people to jump in. You've had quite a few films with New Day thinking about the immigrant experience, and I was curious, how have you seen your films used in the classroom, and how would Waking Dream be, how would you see it being used?
Good question. I've seen three titles and like 4 films with New Day, and they're in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of classrooms and universities and libraries across the country, which I'm so grateful for. And in terms of Waking Dream, the series really covers so much. You know, one, as I mentioned, you know, 2 participants are trying to get into the military. One participant is trying to get her PhD and, you know, and further her education. One is a middle school teacher, so really hits on education and how young undocumented people are tens of thousands are teaching in our schools. So like, what's the implication of that in terms of that experience that they bring to the classroom, as well as what's the implication of immigration policy that could potentially take away their work permit, and we see tens of thousands of teachers kind of leave the classroom. So and another one is it really kind of focused on family separation and deportation. His parents were deported and his sister self-deported, and it's kind of a different version of family separation than we see in the news, and then we've seen kind of happening at the border of families being separated right when they cross. But it's a reality of every kind of like administration, no matter what your politics are, that deportations are separating families. So we see kind of like the residual effect that has on the community, and how that kind of goes out further outside of the undocumented community. So this film, I think it could apply to law and law classes. It could apply to kind of like immigration and border studies, of course. And then it could also really apply to films are used a lot. My films are used a lot in Waking Dream as well by social workers and in kind of like the mental health field, because we also see the mental health effects and kind of the post-traumatic stress and the trauma that has happened from deportations, et cetera, and then also continues to happen from as an undocumented person just turning on the news. There's like trauma and triggers and kind of mental health effects that happen there. So it has a kind of a lot of places in the classroom and in education that it can fit in.
Well, we're out of time for this one, but please have questions for our next one. Theo, thank you so much. You're really changing the narrative as to how people view immigrants and migration and all that kind of stuff. So we really greatly appreciate it. We'll roll back to Laura and we'll see our next trailer. Thanks, Theo.
Great. So our next film is Where Are You Taking Me? And it's directed by Kimi Takesue. Sorry. Would you like to say, sorry, Kimi?
It's fine.
Thank you. Kimi's an award-winning filmmaker and a recipient of the Guggenheim and Rockefeller Fellowships in Film. In 2018, she was awarded the prestigious Breakthrough Award and fellowship from the Chicken and Egg Pictures. Her films have screened extensively in festivals and museums internationally. So without further ado, Kimi, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks to all of the organizers, everyone at New Day, and thank you for the other folks that are joining us today. So my film is Where Are You Taking Me? And it is an immersive sensory journey through contemporary Uganda. And the film is structured in a series of observational vignettes, and it moves from the city to the countryside and really explores the rhythms of everyday life in Uganda. So that includes visiting a high society wedding, an independent film shoot, women's weightlifting competition, a school for survivors of civil war, and many other places. And really by exploring or showcasing the beauty, the humor, the poetry of everyday life in Uganda, the film challenges a lot of lingering stereotypes, I think, that exist about Uganda. So often Uganda and other countries in Africa are represented, in the context of victimization and suffering, with a focus on disease or poverty or corruption and dictatorship or war. And, while these things, of course, are very important, it's also critical to see other aspects of these cultures. And so in contrast, Where You Taking Me really, I think, presents a multifaceted and humanistic portrait of the country and its people. The film is also very much about the process of looking cross-culturally. So the film raises a lot of critical questions about the politics and the problematics of cross-cultural representation. You know, how are images of other cultures being disseminated? How are these images being consumed globally? So I think the film raises a lot of essential conversations around the sort of ethics, the power dynamics, and the complexities of cross-cultural image making. So I'd love to share the trailer with you now, and then hopefully we can talk a little bit more about it.
Hoy es percussion night. Expect lots of percussion tonight.
Well, thank you so much. That's such a beautiful film, Kimi. And I have been curious, we were talking about this earlier, you know, a lot of libraries and professors and universities do have more limited budgets now. How, and your film is such a like ethnographic film, but in a different way. How do you see your film helping supplement and fill out people's collections?
You know, well, I'm a professor at Rutgers University, Newark, and I see in my students, I think there's a lot of interest in interdisciplinary learning and really, you know, students being able to kind of make connections between different areas. And I think Where Are You Taking Me is a film that sort of crosses many, many different sort of academic disciplines and areas. So for example, you know, the film is being used in courses like in African Studies, and as an example of a film that, you know, provides a non-stereotypical representation of Uganda. The film is being used in cultural studies, cultural theory, and anthropology courses that examine in particular the cross-cultural gaze and, you know, through the lens of power and race and gender and ethics. The film is being used in documentary and filmmaking and visual arts courses as an example of a visually driven sensory observational documentary that is unique in its structure and very distinctive, I think, in its style and audio qualities. And then the film is also being used in courses like in peace and conflict studies because it does, I think, present a different representation of trauma in the sense that there's a section of the film where we go to a school where there are kids who are survivors of civil war, and many of them are child soldiers. But they're presented, first of all, really as very multifaceted kids with a variety of interests. And you don't know until very late that actually they have this history. And while it's, of course, very important, it's not the sole defining thing. And I think, too, you know, I guess I would also just advocate that I think it's important for libraries to really to be supporting, you know, inclusive filmmaking. And just as a woman of color, you know, having films by women of color in their collections, where I just think it's critical that that inclusivity and diversity is reflected in their libraries that, you know, students can access.
You know, I've been really curious when I've seen your trailer and talked to you about this film is what took you to Uganda and how did your experience there shift your own idea of the culture and kind of what you brought to the film?
Well, you know, this film was actually commissioned by the Rotterdam International Film Festival, and part of the initiative was for filmmakers to go to different places that had very, you know, less developed film infrastructures and actually for us to go and to explore the local film scene and to find like local filmmakers who were really interesting and introduce them to the Rotterdam Film Festival, who then ended up commissioning work from them. And then in that process, we were asked to make a project. So for me, it was a very exploratory thing. And it was just a very, you know, again, the only way I went into it was knowing that I didn't want to replicate, you know, a lot of stereotypical representations that I felt that I was very familiar with. And I wanted to just kind of be led from one place to the next. And I think that the film sort of recreates that illuminating journey, but also it's structured so that the viewer really goes on that journey as well. And so that they have that sort of life enriching, I think, and stimulating experience of just, you know, travel and encountering, you know, points of real cultural commonality and then points of real cultural difference. But again, I think overall the film is really working to deconstruct a lot of dominant stereotypes that exist about Uganda.
Do we have any questions from the audience? I don't want to be pigging all the questions. If there's anybody, you can unmute yourself and just go for it. Okay, if not, I'm going to do another one for Kimi. I was kind of curious, you really take us on a journey to Uganda, and I'm wondering, is there any relevance now, do you feel, to COVID and the pandemic and to the story?
Well, I guess I just think, you know, because we're so confined right now, and I think people are so hungry for encounters, I think the film in a way fulfills, of course, that initial desire to just be sort of transported elsewhere. And I think, you know, for example, students aren't able to go and study abroad programs, but of course they're still interested about the world and seeing different aspects of the world. But I think in the bigger picture beyond COVID, the film is really about, it's really raising these questions about the complexity of seeing another culture and seeing that culture in its complexity. And so I think that those are, of course, ongoing, that's an ongoing issue that remains relevant now, and particularly when young people begin to travel. I think it's a film that, you know, raises a lot of important conversations for young people too, when they think about travel and how they're interacting with another culture.
Well, thank you so much. And it's time for us to move on to the next trailer and the next filmmaker. Thank you.
So our next film is Refugee, directed by Sylvia Johnson. And Sylvia is a filmmaker and an impact strategist born in Bolivia and raised in 6 different countries in the Americas. She's a National Geographic explorer, a Fulbright scholar, and an organizer for racial and equity and abolition. Her films have screened at festivals and venues around the world. So Sylvia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Laura, and so grateful to all of you for being here today. I'm really excited to share this film. It's really kind of coming into its own, a kind of a critical moment in this nation's history, and so it's really encouraging to have educators participating in that. I work primarily on films that are tied to social action campaigns, where the film is then used as a tool to inspire action. And this film, Refugee, that we're featuring here, similarly to what Theo was saying, was really about humanizing who are the immigrants and refugees, asylum seekers who are currently coming to our country and presenting themselves largely at our southern border, and breaking down some of those stereotypes, both about who they are, but also highlighting what we're currently as a country doing to people who are coming here seeking safety. So this film follows the story of Alpha and Zeffirino. They each fled violent threats to their lives in their home countries. They presented themselves totally legally at the US border asking for political asylum, and were then incarcerated in for-profit prisons for months on end, which is largely what we're doing to anyone who's presenting, at least pre-COVID, asking for asylum. So I just want to give you a little bit of background about how I came to this film and why I ended up telling this story. In 2017, I went with a group of attorneys to the Cibola Immigrant Detention Facility here in New Mexico. We were there to help provide legal orientation to immigrants that were being detained. And what I discovered and was horrified by was that the Cibola facility was actually a federal prison facility that had been closed in October of 2016 because the conditions were so bad that several inmates had died and they'd lost their contract. The same exact facility then reopened in February of 2017, same guards, same conditions, same everything, just a different human population being detained there. So over the course of going to the prison and providing legal orientation, I befriended many of the immigrants who were detained there and also saw what horrendous violation of human rights was happening inside all of these facilities. So Alpha and Zephy are the two who first won, the attorneys first won their asylum cases. So they were the first to be released from that facility and really wanted to tell their stories to help the thousands and thousands of others like them from all walks of life who are detained in these places. I'd love to show just a really short opening clip of the film. It gives you a sense that we used a mix of illustration, animation, and live action footage to tell this story, because there are a lot of elements that we weren't able to film. So it's really short, and then I'd like to tell you a little bit about the impact that it's had since then after you see the clip.
Você veio pedir asilo porque você está fugindo de uma coisa muito perigosa na sua terra. Quando você chega onde tem socorro, e essas pessoas também que têm que te ajudar naquela hora, te faz como se fosse um criminoso e te leva dentro da prisão. Eu estou permitindo a equipe de filmagem para filmar porque o mundo precisa ouvir algumas coisas que estão escondidas.
So one of the things that's been really amazing about this project, in addition to the feedback we've gotten in classrooms about it being a useful tool for humanizing and making real an issue that's really relevant but very polarized in our contemporary media, is that it's already been used for real tangible change, which is super exciting and just happened this week actually. Here in New Mexico, after seeing the film, local teachers realized that their educator pension funds were invested in the private prison corporations that are running these detention facilities. And they, working with a group called Teachers Against Child Detention, along with several UNM student and faculty groups, as well as local and national teachers unions, organized around this. And just last Friday, were successful in getting the New Mexico Educational Retirement Board to divest their teacher pension funds from private prisons. So it's one tactic for pushing back on and trying to end the human rights abuses that are so rampant in these facilities that really dovetails with many of the issues happening nationally. But it's super exciting to see a film that both raises awareness and then helps move people to action immediately.
Sylvia, I love this film, and I had the pleasure of being able to see it before you even joined New Day on the festival circuit, and just thought it would be such a great fit for the film, and reached out to you and said, you know, how much I loved it and thought it would work well. And I'm so excited to hear about this latest news as well. I've been so curious ever since watching your film and never having the chance to ask you, what brought you to this story? How did you find it? I know you've lived all over the world and have covered all kinds of stories. What made you cover this story?
Yeah, well, largely it was because I was working with this immigration legal services organization that when that facility opened here in New Mexico, I went with them, not as a filmmaker, as someone providing legal orientation. But I think I really connected to the people who were being detained in this facility because they came from the countries that I had grown up in. Many of them came from Central America, South America, places in Africa. So I could imagine myself very easily, if the color of my skin were different and the place of my passport were different, I would have been in their shoes coming to this country. And so it was very, very personal to me to be in these places and meet people from similar and different walks of life who just by circumstance were being incarcerated against international law.
Sylvia, can I jump in and just ask?
Of course, absolutely, please do.
Okay, I'm curious how you would, how can educators best use it in the classroom setting? Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, absolutely. We have used it so far in classrooms ranging from middle school and high school to college classes. We have a whole toolkit that people can use both around looking at what immigration policy currently is, what the history of it is, and how it's being currently applied, especially to asylum seekers, and what maybe needs to change around that. So a lot of law classes have been really looking at immigration policy, but also just taking something that, looking at US history and really humanizing this conversation, you know, similar to what Theo was talking about who are the people coming here, what are we doing to them, how can we see them as ourselves. So we've gotten really good feedback about a whole wide variety of ways that classrooms can use it.
Any questions out there? Sylvia, I'm curious, you know, with all the uprisings that have been happening in the country, how the film is even more relevant now with racial equity, with COVID, just how does it relate to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, the film this summer became more relevant than ever for two reasons. One is the COVID pandemic, and as that has spread across the country, both nursing homes and prisons have been the largest places where the disease has spread, the virus. And here, so the fact that people are being detained, in some cases very illegally, in these facilities where they're essentially trapped in a tinderbox during a global health pandemic has made the film really relevant for highlighting like what that experience might be like and why we need to change that system. And then secondly, with the Black Lives Matter uprising is really highlighting so many elements of racial inequity in our country. And these prisons are part of a much, much larger mass incarceration system, which is fundamentally racist, built on a racist structure from the beginning. And so the film is part of looking at ways, how can we deconstruct these? How can we dismantle these systems and work towards greater equity? And part of that is not incarcerating people who don't need to be in those facilities.
I have a quick question before we finish off. I have a question from Judy Leaf. With your toolkit for students, do you have sort of take action steps that they can check out in your toolkit?
Yes, absolutely. We have a few very specific exercises that help students put themselves in immigrants' shoes and walk them through that experience of what it might be like to run for your life and then be detained. And then we have very specific action steps that people can take around divestment if they want to initiate a divestment campaign in their community, at their university, at their school. Most educator pension funds, actually most retirement funds have holdings in private prison corporations. So it's a really powerful strategy for trying to shut down that system. And there's very specific things that people can do, and that's included in the toolkit.
Great. Well, we have to unfortunately move on. These things are flying by. So Laura, take it away.
Okay.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Our next film is How I Live, directed by Meghan Shea. And Meghan is a filmmaker with a focus on healthcare, social issues, and the arts. She produces and directs films that leverage the power of storytelling to create social change. So as the founder of Persistent Productions, she oversees their documentary projects and their social impact campaigns. Meghan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you so much to everyone for joining. It's really exciting to be able to kind of share the film and have the opportunity to speak about it. So the film How I Live is a film that follows 4 young people with cancer globally, and we follow them through treatment, many of them from diagnosis through treatment over about 4 years. The patients come from a variety of countries, so we have Myanmar, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Ghana. And the film is really also a very personal film to me. I came to the subject matter by way of my younger brother was a pediatric cancer patient and lived for 10 years with the disease before passing away from cancer. And so really kind of my coming of age and his coming of age, a decade of it was spent in and out of cancer treatment. And throughout that time, we developed kind of close relationships with his care team at Dana-Farber Boston Children's. And part of kind of the unit that cared for my brother was also part of kind of a global initiative that looked at cancer care for children globally. And so I was really interested in kind of humanizing that experience of what was the patient family experience like globally. Statistically, patients that live in low and middle income countries have only a 20% chance of survival. By contrast, patients in high income countries have an 80% chance of survival. But when you kind of peel back the statistics a bit, there are these real centers of kind of innovation and collaboration and hope. And so I like to say that our film, while the statistics are quite devastating, our film is really kind of biased towards hope. We focused on centers kind of excellence regionally, where they were changing the national and kind of pan-national survival rates in these regions and looking at kind of innovative ways that they were doing that. And so the film is both kind of a personal look at the families and healthcare provider experience through the lens of each of these families, but also kind of brings to light some of the trends that have been successful in kind of regional cooperation to increase the survival rate for children with cancer globally.
We know that no child should die in the dawn of life, right? And that's the most unfair death, right?
I mean, it's a moral imperative. We don't want to let children die from causes that we can cure. And we know that treatment is possible. It's a question of having a good diagnosis early on and access to treatment. So there's no reason not doing it.
Empezó en un partido que tenía de fútbol, me golpearon aquí y lo vimos como un simple morete, un golpe. Me empezaba a cansar bien rápido, le empezaba a hacer, no podía correr mucho.
Some of us even have dreams about them, so this is how much their burden is.
The standard chemotherapeutic drugs, by and large, they are not expensive drugs. They're mostly generic drugs that we've had for decades. But getting access to those drugs is a major problem.
Don't let that stop you from bringing your child for treatment. Even if you just have enough for transport, you bring the child.
How many pediatric oncologists are there in Myanmar?
Less than 5.
Throughout Africa, Asia, Latin America, we're seeing tremendous gains.
Do you know the MASH TV series in the US? This is just like MASH. De repente se deja venir todo y caen bastantes etapas de tierra, no es fácil.
But I guess the most important thing is to be close, to understand, to have a good communication with parents. Sometimes it's more important than money.
This reward might be in life and this reward might be in heaven. But we have to give others.
Las personas asocian el cáncer con la muerte. No es cierto, porque yo estoy aquí, presente ante ustedes.
Es por eso que abogo ante los líderes del mundo. No me queda más que decir, estamos en sus manos.
Hi, Megan. Thank you so much. I've been curious ever since seeing your trailer. You know, you told us about your brother and what brought you to the story. But, you know, it's quite a feat to find these different subjects in multiple countries. And I'm wondering how you did that. And you obviously have very intimate access, how you achieved that.
Thank you for the question. So we really started very collaboratively with some of the doctors who are working in the space, both at Dana-Farber and then through some of their connections. And we kind of developed some of the initial idea together, like how would we tell the story? What are some of the key kind of issues that would be important to look at? Where are the regions where this is really being kind of focused on? And so we got a bit of seed funding and we spent a year going to 15 different hospitals all over the world to educate ourselves about kind of some of the key issues, but also kind of go in with arms open, collaboratively speaking with the hospitals and the doctors on location to see, you know, is this something they would be interested in participating? It's obviously a big ask, the patients and families and of the institutions that welcomed us in. And so because we were working closely with kind of some global health experts, this would not exactly have been my filmmaking predisposition, but we made like a matrix. And so we kind of ranked locations based on wanting to have a diversity of infrastructure, regional diversity, and then kind of diversity within type of patient disease. And so we had this kind of hard numbers approach in one sense, and then in another sense, we had kind of the interpersonal kind of filmmaker approach. Like, do we think these people would be interested in collaborating over the long term? So it was both kind of this combination of like the arts and science that drove the project, but also even in that selection process early on of where would we go back to and where would we focus. And then within that, we worked kind of individually with each location to say, how would you like us to find a patient family? Do you want to suggest someone? So the psychosocial team was involved. And then in some other cases, kind of patients would approach us like out of curiosity, and it was like relationships were started that way as well. So
you're a new member at New Day, Meghan, and which we're very excited about. Have you had other films that also you've used for education? Is this your first? A little bit about your background as a filmmaker.
Yeah, sure. So kind of a little bit of both. I spent about 10 years working out of Southeast Asia and Singapore specifically, and so had the opportunity to do some films on, world religions, on Sikhism, on wildlife, and so used some of those films in classroom settings and educational settings, and kind of relocating back to Boston recently and having the chance to come to New Day, I feel like it's just clarified that focus even more. So
great.
Yeah.
Well, again, we have to go on to our last but not least film, Undeterred by Eva Lewis. Go ahead, Laura.
Yes, so Undeterred by Eva. Eva is an independent media maker based in Arivaca, Arizona, a community, which is a community in the U.S. On the Mexican border, and she's involved in local struggles to organize for border justice and spends her time documenting these struggles. So without further ado, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Laura, and everyone for organizing this. It's really cool to hear about all the other films in New Day. I really like New Day because just there's such a theme of all of these films are about humanizing and sort of deconstructing these mainstream narratives and misconceptions that people have. So I think that that's so powerful and important. And yeah, Undeterred is trying to do the same things. It is about the town where I live, which, like Laura said, is a town on the US-Mexico border. And I've lived here for a little less than a decade, but before I came here, I really had no idea what life on the border was like, and no idea what was going on in the borderlands. And so I was drawn to make this film because I wanted to like share that knowledge with people who don't necessarily live in the border, and to have an educational tool about what border militarization actually means and how it functions and what it actually looks like on the ground. Because so often in the mainstream media and in the press, you see when people are talking about border communities, it's the same conservative ranchers who are interviewed over and over about what's going on. And so Undeterred was sort of an attempt to present the counter narrative of what's really happening here. 30 plus years ago, there wasn't really, we had an open border and people passed back and forth. And now today what we have is a veritable war zone where people are literally dying by the thousands every single day. And there's so much militarization. There's tanks and checkpoints and agents and helicopters and fighter jets and drones. It really truly is a war zone. And so Undeterred tells the story of sort of the recent history of that militarization through the lens of the community of Arivaca, where I live, and how it has affected and changed life here, and how the community has organized to push back and to respond. Because the truth is, when you live in a rural border community like Arivaca, the residents here for the past 20, 30 years have really been on the front lines of having to respond to the humanitarian crisis being caused by border militarization. People come up to people's houses all the time who have been lost in the desert, without food, without water, who are injured, who are dying. And the community is highly surveilled, highly policed, highly militarized. And I think, and so the film follows the story of the community organizing here and how people have organized around providing humanitarian aid, and also a campaign specifically to remove the checkpoint that Border Patrol has on the road in and out of town. So my hope for the film was that it would be educational about the conditions on the border and the policies and how they actually work and function, and that it would be inspirational that even people who are small groups and small communities do have the sort of resilience and tools through mutual aid to organize and to resist policies like this that are killing people. And so yeah, that's why I made Undeterred. That's what it is. And I hope, you know, it has been used in various classrooms for starting conversations about those things. And so I hope that it can continue to be. Yeah. Maybe now we can watch the trailer.
The Border Patrol has become an agency out of control.
There was people yelling with guns, and there was nothing really I could do.
They said, shut up, or we're going to taser you, and they put me in handcuffs.
Border Patrol officials or CBP officials have said that the agency views itself as a paramilitary force that operates outside of normal constitutional bounds.
The whole reason why we've had so many people die in southern Arizona is in response to enforcement patterns over time.
I would say definitely the border is in a situation of a public health crisis.
The entire United States border strategy is based on deterrence. People who are migrating to reunite with family or to support themselves or their families are not deterred. Human beings don't operate that way.
The Border Patrol strategy that pushes people into the remote regions of the desert pushed them into a migration corridor that spills out into the town of Arivaca. And so residents have sort of been the first humanitarians to respond to that.
Arivaca is made up of less than 1,000 residents, but there is a movement brewing within the community, and it is gaining momentum.
As a tool of surveillance, the checkpoint is used to profile and police the Arivaca residential population on a daily basis.
We have watched our children become accustomed to interacting with armed agents in order to go to school. Helicopters swarm low over our properties, and drone surveillance has become a given.
We, the people who find the bodies, the people who live in this town, we know who the murderers are.
AVP, listen up! Arivaca's had enough! AVP, listen up! We won't give up! We'll be back, 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 we won't give up!
Wow, Eva, you've played at a ton of festivals. Holy cow. I wanted to start off just by, you know, it's very rare that we have a film that comes from a filmmaker who's right in a community. And Arivaca, like, you live there and are making the film about that place. And as it says, there's a population of about 1,000 people. How was it working so tightly with the community? And of course, you have to live with these folks if they don't like what they saw, or if they did like what they saw. How is that working so tightly with a community that you live in?
Well, I like small community. I like communal things. That's why I like New Day. So the film was really, Undeterred really grew out of, I plugged into the organizing that was happening and said to people, oh, well, I know how to make videos. And people said, oh, you know, it'd be great as if you made something that could tell people about the checkpoint and what the issues are with the checkpoint. So I started making like short videos about that, and the organizing was happening and I was making short videos. And then it was just kind of like an organic, like, oh, there's a longer story here. What would you guys think? And the whole process was very collaborative with other people. So I definitely have always felt like I can't take full credit for the film because it really was this brainchild of all the people in the community who were working around these issues and the people who are in the film, which was a really special way to make it. And I feel like it felt really important because it's not just my story, it's the community's story. And that's really like the central theme, and the character is this community organization. So yeah, it felt important that the whole process be coming from that group. Yeah.
If you had your greatest hope, how would you see the film being used educationally? What kind of issues would you like it to really push forward?
Yeah, well, so we've screened the film in a lot of schools throughout the country. I was touring it for about 2 years. Like, we've screened it at middle schools and high schools and a lot of universities and colleges. And I think it's been powerful to me to see, like, we did a screening at NYU in New York, and a student came up to me afterwards and said that the film really resonated with him because he lived in the Bronx, and every day on the way to school, he had to go through a police checkpoint. And so I think like making the connections, first of all, I think like right now we're living in this moment where the border wall is being constructed and there's this national focus on border issues and on immigration and the wall. And I think it's really, really important to put that debate in context and for people to understand that the walls originally went up. There were border walls that were originally constructed in the 1990s, and that there's a whole history that has led us to this moment. And there is a difference between the sort of policies represented by Trump and Biden, but as we approach this election, to understand that when Biden says, oh, I wouldn't continue constructing the wall, but I would continue to have surveillance and I would continue to do these other things, really what that means and what that looks like on the ground, I think is so important for people throughout the country to understand, because it's really not just Arivaca's border wall with Mexico, it's the entire country and the entire continent that is affected by these things. And it's people throughout the country. I mean, I think it's so great that we have Theo's film and Sylvia's film, because their films really like show that the border is also everywhere, and these divisions between people and the ways that we sort of like are able to normalize the suffering of certain communities and normalize death and normalize oppression and normalize policies that kill people. I think it's important to understand how that happens and how that's functioning, because what we're seeing now and what we've seen like this summer, like with all the protests that were happening and with actual Customs and Border Protection agents snatching people off the streets of Portland, that is something that has been brewing for a long time in the borderlands and has been happening. And so I think people need to understand that history. And so when I think of Undeterred as an educational tool, I think of it as a way for people to draw the connections between what's happening now and the history of policies that has led us to this moment, and also to understand the ways that no matter where you live, your life is in some way directly impacted by what's happening on the border.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to cut you off. We're just out of time, and I know people have a tight schedule as far as eating their lunch and get back to their day. So I'm going to have Laura take us out. But thank you so much, Eva. We really, really appreciate your beautiful film.
Yeah, I mean, we just appreciate all of your beautiful films. I mean, they're impactful, they're educational, they encourage action to be taken, and we have hundreds of more films on our New Day website. So Mike, I'm going to let Mike take over from here, and he's going to talk a little bit about our collections, licensing opportunities, and then we'll wrap up. So.
Hey, thank you, Laura. I appreciate it. Hey, one of the things that kind of stands out for me is, being in New Day, we're so close to these films and they're so powerful, and we have access and we have the ability to, learn a lot just kind of being on the inside. But the benefit of being able to broadcast this to a larger audience, that's our goal. The last, well, let's say 2020 in general, right? It's been a challenging year for so many of us, in so many ways, filmmakers, librarians, teachers, the entire community. We had to pivot early this year, and we had to put a little more focus into how we can kind of reinvent ourselves a little bit and be accessible to our buying audience, our committed buying audience. We started off with a 14-day free streaming trial early this year that was well received, and we took it all the way up to the level where we introduced a life of file product that the majority of our filmmakers have today on their sites. But I just wanted to recap some of the highlights of what's in our offering so you have a good understanding of the flexibility and how you can use it to your advantage in your environment. From a streaming standpoint, you'll notice that a lot of the films on our site now, you'll see for the most part either 1 or a 3-year license option for streaming. I know there are some that have 5, but the majority of them are 1 to 3 year streaming. And different price points in that scenario. The life of file piece is kind of new, but it is important. We've seen a lot of demand from our engagement with our customer base requiring that option in our space. So that is another option. It may not be across the board yet with all filmmakers, but you'll see that option is available for the majority of them. We still have an outside relationship with Canopy. We keep that in the equation as well if you happen to have a current relationship with Canopy. But for the most part, there are options on the price point in the streaming space. I think we want to be a little creative for those who are on this call to give you a little incentive with some discounts that we can discuss in later conversation or in follow-up. I'm part of a collection sales team for New Day, and what we do on that side of the house is a little bit different. There are some demands that come to us where our buyers are looking for volume purchases, and we have been hard at work kind of creating some options in that space as well. On the collection side, we focus a little more attention on either providing volume licensing and discounting on a tiered structure, or we give you the option to even consider what we call our discounted structure for colleges, for community colleges and high schools alike. So if you ever have any questions on the collection side, our email address is collectionsales@newday. And obviously, if you have any general questions for the New Day community, orders at New Day. And of course, you can always reach out directly to the filmmakers themselves, directly from the site. One of the things, in all honesty, that really separates us from the rest of organizations that provide films for the educational community is the fact that you have a very personal connection to our filmmakers. You can go directly to the site and you can engage them, and they are certainly accessible for Zoom calls, for Skype calls, for any type of Q&A sessions that you want to have with your audience. One of the big value adds that we just introduced to our buyers is another option so that you can extend access to your virtual community. So now, where your majority of your student population are remote, you now have the option to have what we call email access, so that end user, that student, has the ability to stream the same film in their safe and convenient environment. So that is something that's new, but we haven't moved away from our IP proxies or any of our other methods to broadcast streaming, but we just wanted to add that extra layer as it seems to become more and more the standard today as we're living in our virtual world. But yeah, that's pretty much it. There are options, and there'll be some follow-up and some communication. And thank you again for your time. Laura?
Sure. We're going to be sending up, follow-up emails, and just to let you, for you guys to have additional links. And we have upcoming showcases Wednesday, November 4th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, Tuesday, November 17th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And I think the link is in your chat. Thank you all so much for coming. That is a wrap, as we say in the business. And if anyone wants to stay for a few extra minutes, you're welcome to. We'll keep this open. How long will we keep this open, Reagan? Or for a couple minutes? Or is it a wrap? Is it an official wrap?
I think we should probably wrap. Yeah,
All right.
I think it's been great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Amazing films.
Thank you
Beautiful,
all.
beautiful, powerful
Filmmakers,
films.
attendees.